All right, so our objectives today, as we look through nutrition for special populations, or all the people that don't fall into the classic RDAs, first we need to be able to kind of define like what is a special population, what is that considered, and then like how are we going to consider those things, when it comes to athletes, like what if we are working with a diabetic athlete or a pregnant athlete, right? What about a youth or working with a senior, a college student, or vegetarian, the veganism, that's definitely one we also need to talk about. So we're going to be kind of looking at all those different populations and some of the adjustments that we need to make, which means we'll have some base information here related to, what these conditions and diseases are and stuff. Or not even necessarily always diseases. Some of it are youths, but it is still like a segment. It's sort of a sub segment of our list of clientele. So when it comes to talking about like meal plans, right? At the end of the day, like what you are trying to do is you're trying to develop, like work with your athlete, sit down together and guide them into making like healthy decisions to meet their metabolic and nutritional needs, right? And everybody's gonna be a little bit different, like every athlete is gonna have like slightly different needs. If you've got a client who's just working, they're working a 9-to-5 job, they exercise. It's so funny. I just watched this video. It's funny. I don't watch like reality TV or anything. I don't really like, and in fact, I don't watch any like regular just like TV that often because it's all streaming now. But my roommate loves Married at First Sight. It's a like reality TV show. My version of that, like my version of like reality TV, and like my guilty pleasure that I absolutely love. I will watch like some random Yahoo post up like here's what I did for my weight loss journey transformation. I actually really love stuff like that. Like even if it's just like somebody who's like, yeah, I mean, you just need to get like 3 grams of protein for every pound of body weight a day. And it's like they have no idea what they're talking about. I still enjoy watching those videos just because I love watching someone like meet their goals and succeed and stuff. And so this morning I just got finished watching one, and it was like this guy who was on like a journey over about close to 2 years. And he was just talking about like what that was like and how he worked out every single day, but when he calculated out his total daily energy expenditure, he's like look, I work out every day, but that doesn't mean that I'm like very active. That means I have a desk job. So he's like I need to put myself in the low active category. And I thought that was really interesting because that's a mistake that a lot of people make. A lot of people give themselves credit for being like, yeah, I exercise all the time, I'm super active. And it's like, well, I mean, like, like me, for instance, I'm doing like a heavy lifting routine right now. It doesn't burn that many calories, and that's it, which is why like I make sure that I'm active in other ways. Luckily, I work as a personal trainer, so it's it's a pretty physically moving job. But that has an effect on how many calories you need to consume. So we need to be aware of that. That's why we need to sit down with our clients. And this is a big part of the reason why we apply that guided self-help. If I had a client who's like, if I'm trying to calculate out their TDEE and they're like, oh yeah, no, I'm super active. I work out like Monday through Friday. But it's like, well, are you active like, all day or not, And I'm not saying you need to be, I'm just saying we need to be aware of it, right? Because we're trying to create some type of energy balance. But I thought that was really insightful. I thought it was a really fun thing. So that's something that we definitely need to do. And then, we're looking at like the unique metabolic demands that maybe our athlete is dealing with for, a sport that they're playing, or maybe just like whatever population they happen to be in. If they're diabetic, we need to be aware of like, what the effects of that are. If they have hypertension, we need to talk about like how our diet can address that. So looking at diabetes is our first sort of populace here. Diabetes, we've talked about this before, but it's a metabolic disease, and it basically affects your glucose metabolism. So it is where, we generally will say it's impaired glucose control is the general version of diabetes. So remembering what like glucose does, right? Like glucose is, used by our bodies to like, create energy, right? And then we got to look at like how we actually drive that sugar into our cells. That's what insulin does. So like we will create insulin in response to elevated blood sugar levels. So when you consume something that's very heavy in carbohydrates, those carbohydrates get broken down into sugars, those sugars into your bloodstream. Your body will then create insulin in response in order to process that glucose. And when it doesn't happen, it stays in your blood, and that starts to cause a lot of problems. Like, why is that so bad for us? That's sort of like the follow-up to that. You're like, okay, well, yeah, we have too much sugar in our blood, but what's so wrong with having like a lot of sugar in your blood? Well, the thing is, like when that happens, your blood is supposed to consist of like all these different materials, and like that balance of materials is what allows all of our cells to function. So when you flood the area with too much sugar, it starts interrupting specific like physiologic processes, and it can even cause your cells to basically suffocate, because they aren't able to like, move oxygen the way that they're supposed to. Imagine trying to live your life, just, you fill your house full of sugar from, about 3 feet of sugar, and see how hard it is to walk around, be like walking through sand every day. It would just make everything a little bit harder. Um, that's got to be my weirdest analogy of the day. I need to not go any deeper than that. So when we're talking about this, there's sort of 2 classifications of diabetes that we're going to see. We're going to see type 1 diabetes, which is where the pancreas fails to create enough insulin. You basically have a bum pancreas that isn't creating insulin the way it's supposed to. So then you have low insulin levels, which leads to high blood sugar levels. Or you could have type 2 diabetes, which is actually where your cells have become resistant to insulin. This is the most common diversion of diabetes that we will often see. It's like 95% of cases. Yeah, 90 to 95%, which is crazy because this is the one that honestly like shouldn't even exist. Like type 2 diabetes is where your cells have become resistant because you have consistently created too much insulin. So like your body creates insulin in response to like a massive amount of sugar coming in. And so then your pancreas is creating so much insulin, it's like caffeine, a cup of coffee doesn't do for me now what it did when I was in college. Thomas, I don't know if you were in the evening class the other day, but Robert was talking about that because I say this all the time. I always say like, I wish I could go back and be as sensitive to coffee as I was like when I was a college student. Were you around for that? Because I know you're sometimes an evening guy.
I don't think I was.
Oh yeah, he had a really funny line because he doesn't. Robert apparently doesn't drink coffee very often, and so he's like, yeah, he's like, how do you the other day? It's like I had a cup of coffee, and he was like, and I was so wired, and I was like, man, I missed that. That's how I survived, when I was in school, guys, I used to take coffee naps. If you've never done that, by the way, it is incredible. And it's basically where you kill like a really heavy caffeine, like an espresso or something. You just as fast as you can, and then immediately lay down and take like a 20-25 minute nap, because it takes caffeine about 20 to 25 minutes to hit your bloodstream. And then 20 to 25 minutes is like a power nap that leaves you feeling refreshed. So when you wake up, you get hit with the caffeine at the same time. It's incredible. You get deep, bluer blues, greener greens, everything. The whole world is better. And it is how I literally would survive. um, anyway, diabetes, coffee doesn't do that for me anymore. It doesn't have the exact same oomph that it used to, because my body is used to it. It has become slightly resistant to these things. Well, the same thing is true of insulin. Insulin is a hormone. Your body becomes less sensitive to that hormone. And so then like that hormone doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And so then that sugar just kind of stays in your blood. And this is why, both populations will take like synthetic insulin. And then people who are on type 2 diabetes will also take things that hopefully increase their insulin sensitivity. Um, there's actually a really fascinating, if you guys ever want to read about it, look it up. What is that diet? Metformin. Uh, so this is a common medication that is prescribed for people who, have diabetes and stuff. And it has it has side effects. It's a medicine, make no mistake. But one of the interesting things that they have noticed, and they are doing a little bit of research on right now, is that people just, and this isn't because, they had diabetes and then that lowered their mortality rate. Then they started taking metformin and they started living longer. But they have noticed that like giving people metformin causes people to like live longer, like in general. And I don't mean like from the aspect of like the disease is fixing a problem. I mean like if you were to give it to a normal person, they're wondering, would that extend their life in any capacity, just in general. And I was like, that is fascinating and interesting research. But that is something that they are actually kind of currently looking into. But that's a pretty heavy conclusion, so it's going to take a very long time to research. Read about it; it's fascinating. So that's diabetes, right? In its two versions, right? Your inability for your cells to uptake, glucose, right? Your cells can't get them and then use them for metabolism because either you're not producing enough insulin or the insulin is just not doing its job. So what this ends up resulting in is hyperglycemia, which is high blood glucose levels. That is where you have blood sugar levels that are outside of normal ranges. So what will often happen in response to hyperglycemia is that your body will go, it's almost like your body realizes that it woke up late for work, and it's like, wow, we gotta go, and it's in that like big rush to produce a ton of stuff really quickly. It's like my normal morning routine takes 15 minutes, but I need to do it in 3 today, and so you just work really, really hard. You do a lot more effort, and so boom, this huge amount of insulin gets released into your bloodstream, which when there's that much insulin, when it finally does start to take effect, all of that sugar gets driven out of your blood. And when that happens, your blood sugar levels drop drastically. And so then you end up in a hypoglycemic state. So hypoglycemia is abnormally low blood sugar levels, right? So your body will drop into that. And so when we look at like blood glucose levels, always kind of an interesting thing to look at in like chart form. That's not quite what I'm looking for. Where is it? There we go. If you look right here, you'll see like this red line is representing your glucose levels. This blue line is representing your insulin levels, right? And so what happens is like, you intake like a carbohydrate, and then that goes up, and then the body produces insulin in response, and then that drives that sugar out of your blood and into your cells, right? And then like you maybe consume a little bit more, right? And so it's kind of like this bouncing effect here, right? But here's the thing, like what if that gets really intense? What happens if you eat like a starch versus a sugar, right? So starches are, big long chains of glucose, right? Potatoes, rice, whatever, right? Complex carbs. Or what happens if you eat like sugar, like, like my coffee here has 2 teaspoons of sugar in it, right? So that has sucrose in it, which is going to affect my blood sugar much, much, much more intensely, right? And so when you look at these are the little dotted lines here, right? So the starch-rich food is, the double versions, and the dotted line is the sucrose version. So you can see, like, let's see, this is a normal like food here, and then like all of a sudden, like right here, right? Actually, sorry, we're red line. That is where you take in sucrose, and look at how much your blood sugar just spikes, right? Like this goes rapidly up, like higher than it was before. which causes you to create more insulin than you created before. So you create a massive amount of insulin. But what that does is that drives all of that sucrose out of your blood, right? And then that causes your levels to drop really low, which is probably going to cause like hunger. And so then, like, what's going to happen? You're probably going to consume a massive amount of it. And so it becomes really difficult to manage your blood sugar levels when you are eating foods that are super high on the glycemic index, that are going to raise your blood sugar levels really, really quickly. So this chart's kind of showing you like what our body does in response is that it overproduces insulin. This is why our cells eventually become resistant to it, because we're creating so much of it, right? Ideally, if we're going to consume something, that does have sugar in it, we want to make sure that we're doing it with something that is slightly more complex, that is going to lower its glycemic index. Like I had a protein shake just a few minutes before I started drinking my coffee. And like that heavy amount of protein, which is going to slow everything down and get processed, is going to lower how intensely, like, my body's going to get to the sucrose later, and so that's not going to affect my blood sugar as much. Have you guys ever, we're going to definitely talk a lot about this next course starting on Friday. Have you guys ever just eaten an apple all by itself and then noticed like 20 minutes later you are just starving? Like me, I cannot eat apples alone. I'm eating out. I love apples, but like if I have one all by itself, I am ravenously hungry 20 minutes later. Because it is just, my body just breaks that down really, really quickly. So I always make sure if I'm gonna like consume that as like a fruit, I'm always consuming it with like a little bit of cheese or like almonds or walnuts, some type of like fat and protein on the side that is going to lower how quickly that food gets processed in my stomach. So, and then here's what's happening by your pancreas. You can see your pancreas is responsible for releasing that insulin, but your pancreas also releases another material that we got to talk about, which is called glucagon. So your pancreas, sorry, hold on just a second. I need to make sure. Am I getting ahead of the slides here? No. So your pancreas needs to create two major hormones, right? That's going to be insulin and glucagon. Okay. So insulin is this hormone that your pancreas creates that is designed to drive sugar out of your blood. Glucagon, which is sort of the opposite, is designed to release glucose from glycogen. So one of the ways that we trigger glycogen's release from our body is, by triggering, creating this hormone glucagon. So your pancreas is creating both of these materials, right? Which is, again, when you have a bum pancreas, why type 1 diabetics have such a hard time. So your body, if let's say it's been like 5 or 6 hours since you've had like a meal, right? What your body will do is it will release glucagon, which will then release carbohydrates into your blood, because you have in your liver and in all of your muscles a lot of stored carbohydrates in the form of glycogen. So glucagon's job is to raise that. And you've all experienced this. If you've ever been just like to a moment where you're like, man, it's been a couple hours since I've eaten it and I am hungry and angry and like short of attention and short of temper, that is where your body is probably releasing glucagon to keep you moving. Because if your blood sugar levels drop too low, your nervous system, which needs to produce energy pretty quickly, tends to shut down. Like you feel really tired, you feel really lethargic, you feel really bad, cranky, like you start to get a headache, all those things. Those headaches, those hunger pangs are associated with your body saying like, hey, I need carbs, which is why, again, we don't want to villainize carbohydrates. We just want to understand how to consume them effectively. So the big takeaway here is that complex carbs are going to be a very effective way to make sure that you are not spiking your blood sugar levels. And that's really the take home message here. Now, when you are a diabetic, One of the sort of side effects of diabetes is looking at like, ketosis, right? So ketosis, which is very popular nowadays. Do I have any keto diet people in here? Do I have any keto folks in here?
Did, but I just stopped. It wasn't healthy for me.
That's fair. I was gonna say that's actually kind of interesting. Lorian, if I can ask, why did you try keto?
I have a really good friend who she lost a lot of weight. She's about different body type than I was, but it worked for her, and she really got into cooking and stuff. And so when I started getting healthier, I tried it, and I just couldn't stick with it. And for some reason, my body type craves the carbohydrates,
Yeah.
and so I wasn't getting enough protein, and I was I wasn't really doing the program right,
Yeah.
as much as I researched it with the fats and it was just confusing, and I was not moving. My scale wasn't moving. Nothing was moving.
Yeah. It's fascinating. It's funny that the keto diet became such a like popular thing associated with weight loss. It originated it originated in, I want to say, when did it happen? All right, sorry. Keto diet origin year. Yeah, like 1920s. Yeah. It originated as a treatment for epilepsy. They noticed that when there were excessive ketone bodies flowing through the brain, it reduced epileptic episodes, which is, I did not think I was going to be able to say effectively. So it's kind of fascinating. Like it does have like, some effects on the body. Like ketone bodies are these byproducts of, beta oxidation, right? It's this byproduct of, fat metabolism. So what will happen is, when there are insufficient carbohydrates formed, your body will generate these ketone bodies, and that will make it easier for you to metabolize fats and oxidize fats and use those for energy, right? Because we got to skip glycolysis, right? Ketone bodies, Krebs cycle. We have to skip glycolysis essentially and convert a fat into acetyl-CoA, right? And so we break down this fatty acid and turn it into acetyl-CoA. And then once it's acetyl-CoA, it can just go through the normal, Krebs cycle that we see over here, right? And that's what's known as, it creates this material known as hydroxy. Oh no, I messed it up. Beta hydroxybutyrate, which is like what your body will create, and that's going to be your ketone bodies, right? That's your main ketone body. So what happens is you can end up in ketosis, and ketosis is where there's essentially really high levels of ketone bodies in your blood. This is why people who are on keto diets will often test their urine to see how many ketone bodies are in their urine, because ketone bodies are a byproduct, right? They're extra. So your body will get rid of them through like waste. And so like people will test like their pH levels and stuff using like urine strips and stuff. You don't have to do that. There are, you can just make sure you're in ketosis, maybe stick to your diet. But yeah, that's kind of a fascinating thing that people will do. And so, why not do that, right? If that sounds like, hey, we're burning fat for fuel and fat is what I'm trying to lose, and, sugar is bad for me, so why the heck not do a keto diet, right? Well, one of the issues associated with ketosis is that you can, and it's not necessarily, you have to, this is part of like making sure that you are a balanced person, but you can end up with what is called ketoacidosis, right? Ketoacidosis is the acidification of your blood because ketone bodies are more acidic on the pH scale. So when you have like an excessive amount of these, your pH drops and you become very acidic. So you need to balance that out by becoming very alkaline, right? You need to balance that out by eating some more alkaline or base foods. dark leafy vegetables, you know, things that have carbohydrates in them, which unfortunately can possibly drop you out of ketosis, which is not what we're going for, you know? So that's kind of an interesting part of this, and that's an effect of diabetes. That's another reason why diabetes is bad for us, because when you are diabetic, if you end up, you know, driving all of your sugar out of your blood, and then you go into ketosis, and then you generate ketone bodies, and now they're flooding your blood. Again, you can become very acidic, and it can make you very sick. But does that mean I'm saying that the keto diet is bad? Not necessarily. You know, there are ways to do it in a very healthy way. Like you can go into ketosis and, you know, become fat adapted, is what you'll hear people say, where you're primarily burning fat as a fuel source. And as long as you're getting your vitamins and minerals, you know, in per day, your micronutrients, and as long as you're, you know, not becoming highly acidic, you know, you could be absolutely healthy. I don't know why you would go through the effort. But actually, that's not true. I do know why. The reason keto is so popular is because, yeah, it's like a diet that is very, very high in fat. And fat is tasty. So if you happen to be the type of, like Lorianne, you said you crave carbs. Yeah, I identify with that as well. I tend to be more of a carby person. But like if you're like somebody who loves like a really fatty meal, you know, then keto could be for you, you know, because everybody likes bacon. You know, like, well, not everybody, but like, but yeah, like, you know, that's, it's easy to stick to a diet when it consists of bacon and avocado every day. So those are our types of diabetes, right? Like I said, type 1 diabetes, your pancreas is going to not create enough insulin. Type 2 diabetes, your pancreas creates plenty of insulin, but your cells just stop responding to it. And there is a condition, we call it pre-diabetes. This is one of those things where it's like, okay, your blood glucose levels are super elevated, and it's like you're on the road, you know, eventually your cells are going to become, you know, resistant. You are raising your sugar levels too high. That's pre-diabetes. And, you know, a lot of doctors will say, you know, like there's no such thing as pre, it's you either have it or you don't. Same thing with like pre-hypertension. Sometimes you'll hear that, but I mean, like these are all there to like, you know, be like, hey, you know, warning sign, you know? So when you have somebody who has diabetes, like, you know, we want to keep an eye out for that, right? They could experience excessive thirst. All of this takes hydrolysis, so that ends up using up your water, and so you'll be more dehydrated. But you will also end up, so then you'll end up like consuming more water, and then your body is trying to flush those ketone bodies out of you. And so what it will do is you will urinate excessively. And so both of those are actually warning signs. If you are excessively thirsty and you are excessively urinating, which you would think, you know, it's like, oh, why am I urinating? I'm thirsty. Why do I have to go pee? And it's like, yeah, your body is flushing as much water out of you as possible, because that water is how we're going to carry those ketone bodies away. So it can result in dehydration, dizziness, headaches, blurred vision. Sometimes you'll see really dramatic weight loss, like in the very beginning stages of diabetes. That can be a sign. And then poor wound healing is a big one, because again, this is a metabolic disease, right? This is a disease that is affecting our metabolism. So what do we do? How do we help our clients? You know, if we have a client who's diabetic, what's our job, right? Well, our recommendation is, you know, our carbohydrate intake. You know, whenever we are consuming carbohydrates, we want to make sure that it's a nutrient dense option rather than just simply an energy dense option. An energy dense option will probably be very high in sugars, right? Whereas like a nutrient dense option will have plenty of carbohydrates in it. You know, like honestly, like look at like a let's look at like take a look at like white bread versus like whole grain bread, right? If we look, there are 12 grams of carbohydrates in white bread. There are also 12 grams of carbohydrates in whole wheat bread. They are the same carbohydrate, you know, makeup. But when you look at like the amount of fat that they have, you know, that's actually pretty similar. Actually, it's not. I mean, honestly, that's double the fat in the whole wheat bread. And then we look at the protein, that's pretty similar, right? But then we look at the fiber intake, right? You're going to get 2.6, what? Why is there more fiber in the white bread? That is factually inaccurate. That cannot be right, because that's literally what fiber is. It's going to be found in your whole wheat bread. Hold on a second. Friggin'
Yeah, you're right. That's weird. That's not
yeah.
right.
I mean, I'm not, you know what, for the record, that actually could be accurate. They probably just picked two brands that are very incomparable. They're probably, that article, this is Google Images, right? Like I could be looking at like a brand who's saying like, you know, this is like, well, this is why you want to eat this type of white bread, you know? So generally, we'll see, yeah, so here's our levels here, right? And this is a little bit different. We're actually seeing more carbohydrates in the white bread, less carbohydrates in the whole wheat bread, but we're seeing higher protein and a higher fiber intake, almost double the amount of fiber intake. And the big takeaway here, when we see that, whole wheat, whole grain bread is not as processed, so it doesn't pull as much of the materials out. And so a lot of times you will have the same level of carbohydrates, but if you take a carbohydrate and you mash it up long enough, it will start to taste really sweet. If you were to take like a saltine and just sit there and just mash it in like a bowl, right? Like what was it, mortar and pestle? You know, like if you were just like to do that, it would essentially be broken down into its very base components after a while. It would be processed into what is essentially sugar, even though it's still all the same things, right? It's still a saltine, right? So that's what processing food does for us, right? If you look at like the difference, I mean, when you think about like white rice versus brown rice, you know, what's the difference between white rice and brown rice? Well, the difference is what they are, you know, and how they are like processed, right? You can see there are more carbohydrates in white rice, and the amount of fiber is only 0.3 grams, whereas like the amount of fiber in whole, you know, brown rice is much higher. And that's because what makes brown rice brown is the fact that it has this outer extra shell on it that is fibrous. It is, you know, our body can't process that. That's a good thing, right? That, you know, is going to pull stuff out of our body and feed our gut bacteria and do all kinds of good stuff. So that's the big thing. We want to focus on, you know, nutrient dense options rather than options that are very high in sugar. You know, it's not that they're adding sugar to white rice or anything like that. That would be crazy, right? Although when I was a kid, I would do that. How weird is that? When I was a little kid, I would literally put sugar on rice. Bad. But looking at,
That
you know,
is
like,
not weird.
it's not weird.
No, my grandmother, grandfather born 1907, 1910, and that's what their cereal is. It's like rice pudding. So my grandpa got up every morning and made white rice with butter and sugar and milk.
Yep, that's where I got it from. Was my great grandparents. Yeah, absolutely. That's so funny. Yeah, I got it from them. That's also where I drink tea. They call it builder's tea in the UK, but it's like whenever I have a cup of tea, I always add like a little splash of like milk and sugar, which is how like apparently all the construction workers who in the morning, like that's how they take their tea. That's so funny. So that is, yeah, so we're going to focus on those nutrient dense options rather than just sugar dense options. Your protein intake is a little bit lower with diabetics, which seems surprising. But remember, when you have excessive protein, what happens? It gets converted into carbohydrates. And so this is probably honestly like where a lot of people fail on keto diets. Actually, they'll be like, I'm doing this keto diet, and then they'll test their ketone bodies and stuff, and they're just like, why am I not in ketosis? And it's because their protein intake is through the roof. A lot of people think keto is high protein. It's not. It is moderate protein, high fat. If you look at a keto diet breakdown, macro breakdown, it looks like this: 75% fat, 25% protein, and even that's somewhat high. 5% leafy green vegetables, but like otherwise you have to go even higher on the fat. So that actually is what we're talking about, right? Like that is what we're saying. And so it's, you know, it's a diet that consists of, you know, oils and butters and bacons and cheese, and, you know, cheese is okay. I mean, that's not very keto. Well, that's kind of a fun list. So yeah, that is definitely the kind of things that you tend to see on like a keto diet, right? So we want to keep our protein intake about 15 to 20%, a little bit lower in diabetics because we don't want it to convert to sugars. And then your fat intake should be about 30%, sort of the normal stuff there. So if we're seeing that, like let's say we went 30% fat and 20% protein, well, that leaves us 50% of the diet still coming from carbohydrates, even with diabetes. So diabetes does not necessarily mean you are on a low carbohydrate diet. It means you're on a moderate carbohydrate diet. But what is important is that you are not eating lots of sugar. And if we have a client, and so, how do we apply this information to all of our clients? I mean, if we are trying to prevent people from getting diabetes, which should absolutely be everyone's goal, we should be focusing on like, nutrient dense options, which is why love my great grandparents to death. Looking at a picture of them right now. But like, white rice with sugar on top, not a healthy food. Definitely a bad habit. Great source of calories, great source of energy, when the world economy has collapsed, but like maybe not the healthiest of foods. There's a lot of, man, that's a rabbit hole you can go down on YouTube. If you guys ever want a fun like YouTube journey, look up like depression era recipes. Fascinating. It is fascinating what people used to eat. So we definitely want to make sure that our clients do not become hyperglycemic because that can damage their cells, but we also want to make sure they don't become hypoglycemic. Like these people are often taking like synthetic insulin, which is going to drive that sugar out of their blood, or they're taking a medicine, right? Or even if you are like insulin resistant, if you bring in a high sugar meal and eventually your body's like, oh my gosh, we're not getting rid of the sugar. And then it just creates a massive amount of insulin. That will also cause you to become hypoglycemic. That's what's so weird. This is why kids experience that sugar crash, right? Your parents say it's like, don't eat candy because like, you get super hyper and then, like, that's what's happening, right? All that sugar is just dropping right out of the blood. So, when it comes to nutrition recommendations, we're seeing carbohydrates in the normal range that we are used to, 45 to 65%. Protein a little bit lower, 15 to 20%, and fat intake right around 30. I mean, honestly, they're not giving you a range here. Usually fat, we say like, 15 to 30%, but this is like, it's like, we do want it to be a pretty substantial portion there. So you're going to have 50 to 55%, which is funny because that means these numbers don't really match up, but you'll have like 50 to 55% carbohydrate intake left over if you are focusing on this. And that's still a pretty, it's a pretty well-balanced diet. And then here's all the signs of like hyperglycemia versus hypoglycemia if you do have an athlete who's dealing with this. Hypoglycemic is where someone will excessively start sweating, their heart will feel like it's pounding in their chest and it's like trying to escape. They'll be a little hungry, and then they will often experience like some shakiness, incoordination. And then here's the one that everyone is probably familiar with: irritability, headaches, and even nausea. And this is one of the things that we need to manage. If you have a client and you start working them like crazy and all of a sudden they're like, oh, I didn't have breakfast this morning, and they feel like they're going to throw up, you've generated lactic acid, which is now leaking into their, gut and making them feel like really, nauseous, in addition to the fact that their blood sugar levels are just gone. So how do you fix it? Well, generally my favorite way is to be like, you need a banana, or orange slices or something. But it could be, there's a lot of options out there. Gatorade, I guess. That's the example that they always want me to use. It's not my favorite example. Closest to Gatorade that I actually really do like is like freaking coconut water. At least that's somewhat natural, but even that is just sugar dumped into coconut flavored stuff. So hyperglycemic, you can see the kind of other side of things. This is where you'll see somebody who's very restless, very nervous. They tend to have like a little bit too much energy, right? Thirsty. They can eventually end up fatigued. Blurred vision. It can lead to muscle cramps when you are extremely hyperglycemic. That can also lead to nausea and abdominal pain as well. So that is something to be aware of. These are sort of the more extreme versions here. But, think about the last time you saw like a kid, drink something that had like a lot of sugar in it, like a kid with soda, right? They go crazy. So that's diabetes. Any questions on any of that or comments, guys? Speaking of getting my sugar in.
No, it's all good.
All righty. That's also actually, what? One thing I will say, it's kind of funny when you see like diabetics, they'll like still want their coffee and stuff, right? And so they'll switch it out. Actually, what? While I'm here, yeah, one last thing about diabetics. I just want to address this because it's not actually ever brought up. A lot of times you need to be cautious with artificial sweeteners. Now I'm going to talk all about artificial sweeteners in our next course. And I'm going to tell you to avoid them like the plague because they are a plague. But not necessarily every artificial sweetener is bad for you. Like stevia is a natural artificial sweetener. There isn't a lot of evidence to suggest that it has any negative side effects. Well, it has one negative side effect, which is what all artificial sweeteners have, which is that it's really sweet. And so it can actually reduce the sensitivity, similar to how insulin does, of your taste buds to sweet things. Which means you may crave more and more and more sugar, and you may like put more and more artificial sweeteners in things. So be cautious with that. And then another effect is that your brain does not know that you did not just consume a bunch of carbohydrates. And how does your body know when to create insulin? Well, sometimes it's because your blood sugar levels are really high, right? You have receptors running throughout your body that are like, man, it's a lot of sugar in the blood right now. We should probably make some insulin, right? But also when your taste buds are like, wow, this is really sweet. It's like, hey, gut, a lot of carbohydrates are on the way. But when those carbohydrates are not actually on the way, and then your body ends up producing insulin in response, that could also cause you to become hypoglycemic. Which is why they'll say like, they'll create like diabetic cake recipe. And you'll see it'll say like, hey, put this artificial sweetener in here. And we need to be aware that this could actually cause someone's blood sugar levels to drop drastically. Freaking recipes, they never put it. There we go. It's like 10 pages down. Flour, eggs, butter, and a sugar substitute, right? Swerve or Splenda. Yeah, I stay away from Splenda. I'm also not super against sugar alcohols. Those are actually okay as well. Kind of similar to stevia. At least they're something that our body can process. All right, so next thing we got to look at, pregnant athletes. Well, we got a client who's, expecting, right? So they're, they want to stay active, but obviously like they need to change like their diet and activity just a little bit. So it's going to be really important for us to make sure they are getting a full micronutrient intake, because again, micronutrients are how our body makes new cells and how our body metabolizes things. Physiologically, our body relies on micronutrients in order to metabolize stuff and function and create chemical processes. Well, now we're creating a second body within another body, right? That also needs to do all that. And it's a massive growth of cells, right? Literally growing a new human. So if that's the case, micronutrient density is a very important thing. And this is why, there's a huge industry of like prenatal vitamins. So obviously, first things first, before we even actually dive into looking at that, make sure they're following up with their physician regularly. I don't know any pregnant athlete who would ever, not be following up with their doctor often. But like they should be, obviously all these recommendations should be coming from them. Same thing with diabetics, by the way. And then then we're going to make some exercise changes, be like, all right, well now, we're going to avoid prone positions and supine positions. We're not going to lie our client on their stomach, not going to lie our client on their back. We're going to focus on, low impact exercise, things like that. And then we do need to address adjust their nutrition, right? So our nutrition strategies are going to be focused on increasing total calories by about 300 a day on average. But that's just a general rule of thumb. We will see that, that can obviously fluctuate. And again, this should be recommended by their doctor. They're going to need to increase their protein intake. And again, growing a new human, we have a lot of protein there. Need lots of amino acids. And then vitamin A, like your entire B complex, and vitamin C are all going to be pretty vital. I mean, it's not like vitamins D, E, and K are not important here, because those absolutely are as well. But particularly the B vitamins are really important for the metabolizing of materials and like growth of tissues. Vitamin A, really important for the development of like brain development, skin development, eye development. And then vitamin C, is also really important there for, calcium metabolism and things like that. So, and then certain minerals, magnesium's a big one, iron, and plenty of fluids. Again, we are trying to generate new red blood cells for a second body, right? Probably need plenty of iron for that, So generally we'll see about a 300 calorie increase per day, and we should expect a weight gain of anywhere from 25 to 35 pounds throughout the course of like whatever pregnancy, right? Make sure that, and that's to be expected. If you think about like, that maths out, right? 300 calories, right? How many days are in 9 months? That'd be 273 days. 273.75 times 300 divided by 3,500. Yep, 23 pounds. So there's probably some water weight in there, making up that, getting it all the way up to 35 pounds. But yeah, that's what we should expect to see in terms of weight gain. Math. And so we'll also instruct our clients to consume an additional, 20 to 25 grams of protein. Easiest way to do this, by the way, is not necessarily to change your overall diet. It's simply to add a couple snacks in throughout the day. That's one of the easiest ways to do this. Just adding like, little tiny like snacks throughout the day is a great way to make sure that you never fall out of protein synthesis. And it's a great way to make sure that, you're getting those extra calories and those extra nutrients that you might need. So it's like, well, like we need an extra 300 calories. Why don't you consume like a 150 calorie snack of like an apple paired with like a cheese stick, right? And then later on in the day, it's like, all right, well now why don't you pair good source of magnesium is like dark chocolate. Not exactly a health food. Definitely not that great for you. I mean, sure, it's got some antioxidants in it, but like, it's not great. But you could do like dark chocolate and like walnuts or something, and that would be, really good source of magnesium and stuff. 150 calories in the, and then eat your normal diet. And like I said, try to get an additional about 20 to 25 grams of protein. This is also why shakes are so popular, like protein shakes, very popular in pregnant athletes. So protein, lots of really good sources out there. Skim milk is definitely always recommended by the US. I mean, honestly, like if you're going to drink milk, here's the thing, like whole milk is high in cholesterol and high in saturated fat. So that, and those two things could be very bad for us. But at the same time, it is a much more complex food than fat-free milk. And fat-free milk could spike your blood sugar levels, which could have very negative effects. So it's interesting. Like, it's like really just milk is just not great. I mean, like just accepting the fact that milk is not a healthy food. It's a food that is a regular part of my diet and a great source of calories if you are somebody who has a hard time gaining weight. But to say that it is healthy, it's a tool, not it's a tool to be used. Doesn't mean it's healthy, you know. Beef, chicken, fish, obviously good examples. But then again, there's vegetarian options, right? Lentils, beans, legumes, nuts, things like that, seeds. All those are really good options. And we can see here, right? So non-pregnant recommendation, 46 grams of protein per day. I'm assuming that's based on like a 140-pound person. Oh gosh. Yeah. Just convert this to kilograms. 140 divided by 2.2 times 0.8. 50. Yeah. Yeah. So this is probably somebody who's like 135 pounds, 140 pounds or so. So they need about like 46 grams of protein. Pregnant person, we're going to up that. We're going to take it up to 71, right? Folate, it's one of your B vitamins, remember? We can see we need a little bit more of that. Vitamin C, vitamin A, magnesium, iron, all that good stuff. Iron is super high, by the way. Like you're making a lot of new red blood cells, so friggin' get plenty of iron. That's a big deal. Any questions or comments or concerns? Y'all feeling good? Feel cool. All right. So what about, I love this, by the way. This is my favorite title for this whole course. Youngsters. What about youths, right? What about training kids? Because obviously a lot of kids are going to partake in athletics or maybe even just personal training sessions. I haven't worked with too many kids, like little kids. But I have definitely worked with like plenty of like teens and you know, preteens and things like that. And yeah, like, you know, they have like different needs. They have different like metabolisms, they have different everything. So obviously if they're engaging in sports, that's awesome because it's, you know, a great way to develop like bone and muscle strength. It boosts their confidence. It promotes like obviously just a general lifestyle of health and fitness. You know, that's the thing, like, actually, yeah, nobody in here. I was like, if Jerica was here, she's the only one who's been through it so far. If you are like a youth, right? If you have a youth client, it's not about making them the world's greatest athletic 8-year-old, right? It's about giving them the habits that they will hopefully carry into adulthood. And you're making a healthy 25, 30, 65-year-old, you know, whatever. That's what we're trying to establish, you know. And then providing like personal development skills. There's something, you know, special about being part of a team and learning how to be a team player and, you know, things like that. So one of the things we talk about is kind of a fun one. We call it the growth channel. It's the normal height to weight ratio that we see in like youths as they are growing. Obviously, everybody's going to be a little bit different based on your genetics and stuff. Like me, I was actually about this tall in like 7th and 8th grade. I was at one point I was the tallest kid in my school. And I was so worried. I swear I stopped growing from sheer force of will because I was like, I don't want to be any taller. I have an uncle who's like 6'7" and he's massive. And I was like, I don't want to be as tall as Uncle Jeff. That seems like a nightmare. So I swear I stopped just like pure, like every day, like don't do it. But that's like a growth channel, right? Like that's just, I shot up really quickly and then, you know, luckily kind of like plateaued after that. But that's, you know, we are going to look for any of those abnormalities. If we see like a youth who is not growing in height, not developing, it's like, well, there could be something nutritionally that's going on here, right? So we need to look at like their energy intake, take a look at their nutrient intake, things like that. And when I say we, I really mean like from a medical standpoint, like doctors are going to take a look at this. But if a you know, client takes their kid, you know, and your client, and you are training this youth, right? They go to the doctor and the doctor's like, you know, you need more calcium in your diet, you need more protein in your diet, and you need more calories, right? And you come back and the parents are like, how can I improve, calories, protein? We need to be aware of this, right? And it's like, well, calcium's really good sources here, protein's really good sources here. That's, again, skim milk might be the option there. Or, like obviously other options that are out there. And then just general calories, like, get your kids some juice, like if they're just a picky eater, which will happen, find a way for them to get calories easily. Growth spurts are obviously going to be a thing as well. We'll see these growth spurts. When that happens, the bones are, developing in length at what are called the epiphyses. This is this little cartilage plate it's at the very end of your bones. And so like, that's what happens whenever if you remember experiencing growing pains. When you're looking at like these sort of terminal parts of your bones, like the ends of your bones, there are these epiphyseal plates, and that's where all that growth occurs. And so your bones grow away from grow longer, kind of like this, until they hit the designated size according to your DNA. So if they're experiencing that, obviously it's like, okay, so we're growing, normal, like a lot of like protein tissue, metabolically developing and like creating enzymes and things like that. And then we're developing like new bone. So, what do we need? Well, we need lots of proteins, we need lots of B vitamins, and we need lots of, iron, and lots of extra calories. And calcium, if I said calcium as well. So proper height and weight is what we're looking for. This is going to happen because they're achieving adequate calories. And I know like kids sometimes don't like to eat, which is always difficult for parents. So you got to find a way to like get them in there. I was like that when I was a kid. Like I would just be running around, just like, and my parents would be like, you got to come have food. And I'm like, yeah, but I could also just keep playing. I was like, you make a good point, but no. And they'd be like, sit down. So trainers, parents, everybody is going to play a really big role in this to help develop like regular eating habits, providing snacks throughout the day. And here's some what are considered healthy options that kids are going to enjoy. Yeah, peanut butter with whole grain is always a good one. Whole grain cereals, fig bars. Graham crackers are a good source of carbohydrates that are full of sugar, but like, yeah, I mean, at least it's calories. Pudding cups will have a lot of added calcium to them. Again, that's also going to have like lots of sugar in it. Yogurt's a good option. Smoothies, cheese cubes, string cheese, milk or soy, or milk substitutes, fruit juices, and then like, cherries and peaches and apricots and raisins, like all these things that are dried that are easy to like throw into a Ziploc baggie and, take with you. And then with kids, we want to make sure that they are becoming hydrated. One of the things that we know about youths is that they absolutely suck at temperature control. Kids overheat really easily and kids underheat really easily. They will become hypothermic or they will have heat stroke. And so we need to make sure that they are, and that's just because of like the surface area to world ratio that they have. Smaller bodies, right? Less enzymes. So they produce heat much more quickly and they don't sweat as often, which oftentimes causes overheating, which is why it's really important to make sure that like youths are drinking plenty of fluids. Always make sure that like when you're working with like a youth athlete, you've got fluid nearby. This is often why you'll hear me use the phrase like mandatory water break, which is what I will often say in between sets and stuff. And that is, going to tell my client to consume some fluid. And if they hate it, well, then go with a flavored version that they'll enjoy. Micronutrients, special emphasis is definitely going to be placed on calcium. Calcium, very important for that epiphyseal growth that we were talking about a minute ago, right? Generally we're going to see about 1,300 milligrams per day. And then iron is another really big one. Developing, a new body is growing new red blood cells every single day. And so we need plenty of iron in order to allow that to happen as well. But make sure you're not exceeding, like, don't go beyond. We don't want to end up with that, those toxic levels either. Like too much iron can, cause some problems as well. So that's it for youths. Any questions on kids? All righty. So next one, we're going to look at master athletes, which is the most respectful way to say like a senior client. I love this term. I love, like, I'm like, I want to be a master athlete. This is an older adult who's, active between like 40 and 50 years old. It's like that old guy on the basketball court who's like still kicking around. He's been out there, he may not be as fast as some of the younger guys, but like he just knows where to stand and like how to box you out and stuff. Those guys are great. That's a master athlete, right? Or a senior. So obviously we're going to have different nutrient recommendations, right? Different things that we are trying to use to deal with like specific physiologic conditions, right? So total caloric intake needs to be adjusted. Chances are it's going to go down a little bit, considering that like your senior does not, as we get older, our metabolism kind of slows down. Chromium intake is a really important one because that's actually important for like the production of hormones, which we are not producing as much of as we get older. Iron is a really big one as well. Making sure that we're getting plenty of iron in the diet, because we tend to see that like that doesn't happen quite as often in senior populations. And then keeping calcium and vitamin D intake high to ensure that like, yeah, we are bringing in calcium, but we're also using, bringing in vitamin D, which is helping us process that calcium and keep our bones strong and dense and everything. And magnesium is going to help with that as well. Generally, in terms of macro breakdowns, we're going to see a little bit more emphasis on carbohydrates here, about 50 to 65% of the total intake. Protein intake, anywhere from 1 to 1.3 grams per kilogram of body weight. So that's slightly higher than a sedentary individual would be. Sedentary individuals get 0.8 grams. And then obviously that number would be even higher for like senior athletes, right? And then moderate fat levels, about 20 to 35%. Just be careful of how much saturated fat you're getting. A little bit of chromium, about 30 micrograms a day. 8 milligrams of iron, which is actually the same that we saw in our youths earlier, right? But the normal, what's the normal RDA for iron? Huh. 8 milligrams there, huh? That's interesting. And actually it said something on there. This is another really big one for like female senior clients. Iron intake is also really important. Premenopausal, that's a big deal as well. It did mention on that other one, but it doesn't say it here in the slides. And then also for female senior athletes, a little bit even higher on calcium intake. We'll see about like 1,200 milligrams or higher. That's a pretty massive amount of calcium, but the reason why is because we are trying to avoid bone density issues, which are much, much more common in women. Again, due to that menopause process, right? Because that reduces estrogen, and when there's just a reduced amount of estrogen, we just don't see as much bone density. And that's true of males over 70 years old as well. I mean, we want to make sure we're getting plenty of calcium and getting plenty of vitamin D to use that calcium and plenty of magnesium. Again, really important for like, it makes us utilize iron more efficiently. Now, obviously, like there are certain other like chronic conditions that are going to be out there in terms of like just like a disease, right, that we didn't necessarily talk too much about today. Atherosclerosis, that's plaque building up in your blood vessels, for instance. Well, if that's happening, you need to be cautious about your fat intake. Decrease your saturated fat, decrease your cholesterol, try to increase the complex carbohydrates and fiber that you're consuming, because complex carbs and fiber feed your gut bacteria, which release fatty acid chains, which raise your HDL cholesterol, which lowers your LDL cholesterol. That's awesome, right? That's exactly what we want. Fruits, vegetables, and foods that are rich in like vitamin E, which will also kind of help with that process. If your client is struggling with like different types of cancers, be cautious of like their total fat intake, avoiding certain types of meats, alcohols, salty cured foods, you know, stuff that is like heavily processed and heavily cured means that like chances are it's going to have more free radicals in it. And that's something we are trying to avoid. So complex carbs, fiber, unsaturated fats, fruits, vegetables. Arthritis, if your client is overweight, then the first things we can look at is like decreasing the number of calories so we can get their body to be a little bit lighter, and that'll help with the arthritis. And then be careful. This is what's kind of interesting with arthritis. Increase the saturated fat. Unsaturated fat, which is kind of fun because that has been shown to reduce inflammation. So increasing like, your polyunsaturated and your monounsaturated fats, although primarily polyunsaturated, is going to have some really positive benefits. And this is why sometimes people who have arthritis will take, an omega-3 supplement. If your client has osteoporosis, calcium, vitamin D, vitamin K, phosphorus, all the things that make bones. Diabetes, we already talked about that, but be cautious of the refined sugars. Increase the fiber, increase the protein. Watch your total carbohydrate intake, but as long as you're focusing on complex carbs, you're going to be in good place. Hypertensive clients, be cautious. Again, this is saturated and unsaturated fat, so we're going to try to decrease those because that could be clogging the arteries if your hypertension is related to atherosclerosis. But you could also just have hypertension because excessive sodium levels are causing your arteries to harden. That's also not great, right? So decreasing sodium, saturated fat, cholesterols, and then increasing the amount of calcium, potassium, protein, magnesium, and fiber. Again, fiber because that's going to lower your bad cholesterols. But then all of those other materials are going to help with like the production of blood cells, which is going to help your entire cardiovascular system. And if your client is coming back or has a history of strokes, again, decrease the caloric value if they happen to be overweight. That's oftentimes highly associated with obesity. Fat intake, right? This is highly associated with atherosclerosis and hypertension. So we're seeing a lot of the same stuff here. Carbohydrate-rich foods, fibers, antioxidants, fruits, vegetables, things like that. So now let's talk about like vegetarian diets. So really quickly, I don't think that this is, okay, I did have it in here actually. It is in here. So this is kind of fun because you actually have like kind of the classic like food pyramid here. Oh wait, actually, yeah, what's up?
I'm confused about the phosphorus. What is phosphorus like for osteoporosis? What is decreased phosphorus?
So we say that like your bones are just calcium. That's not really super accurate. Your bones are actually made of what is called calcium phosphate. That's the material that's actually in your bones. Like if I look up calcium phosphate, right? It'll, it looks like freaking bone, like, and so like that's, that's hard material there that your body, then lays and lays down to create your bone matrix. So this is where sometimes you will see people take like phosphorus, make sure they're getting plenty of like phosphorus in their diet. So when you're looking at this, any food that's like really high in fat is a really good source of phosphorus. So almonds, you can see egg yolks is a really good one. I have no idea what the heck that is. Actually, I don't know what most of this. I think we're looking at I think this is all Indian food. That's kind of cool. But yeah, here's, some really good source of phosphorus. If it's got fat in it, it's a great source of phosphorus. And then like animal proteins.
Okay, but if I may be wrong, but I thought under the osteoporosis, it said lower phosphorus.
Ooh, that can be right. Whoa, decreased phosphorus. What? 1 second. It could be. Hey man, guess maybe it interrupts the reduction of resorption. That seems really surprising to me. All right, apparently, okay. So it causes, okay, I guess that makes sense. So there's also a little bit of like lowering sodium intake associated with osteoporosis sometimes. And it's like, what does sodium have to do with calcium? Well, sodium and calcium, both metals, are somewhat attracted to one another chemically. And so high sodium intake could cause calcium to just be sort of lumped together and attracted towards your sodium and then get peed out by the body rather than being carried to your bones. I think, based on what I just saw very quickly, I'll do more research. I think that it's, I guess, massive amounts of phosphorus causes the same thing because calcium phosphate is so attracted to one another. So when you have excessive phosphorus in your diet, it can interrupt how quickly your bones actually calcify because it gets attracted to that rather than getting attracted to your body's tissues. Does that make sense?
It does. It does it in calcium phosphate, but what is strange is that I always have under normal sodium levels, and I'm osteoporotic. So I have low sodium osteoporosis, and so that's why I'm like, whoa, what's the best way? But I'm going to talk to my doctor. I'm just waiting to get the medication, but on the dietary wise, they asked me to increase my salt because I'm always low sodium.
Interesting. Yeah. Nothing wrong. You know, that is a problem I do not have. I'm a saltophile. But yeah, like that's so funny that they're trying to tell you to increase it, but that it can also just be related to other parts of your metabolism as well, you know. And I mean, honestly, like sodium is absolutely a super vital electrolyte, you know. But again, this is why we talk to our doctors, right? They're the ones who are literally medically trained to look at all this stuff. We want to help our clients, you know, come up with rich sources of these foods rather than tell them to get those foods, you know. All right, let's take a look at vegetarian diet. So here's kind of a fun one. You can see we go back to the kind of the pyramid here, but obviously like this food pyramid is going to be a little bit altered because there is no meats category and then there's no dairy seafood category, or maybe there is dairy depending on, you know, what type of vegetarian you're working with. So primarily most of the diet should be fruits, vegetables, beans, and legumes and whole grains. This is the substantial portion of protein right here, a little bit from certain whole grains, and then a little bit more protein from like nuts and seeds right here. So we're getting protein in primarily these two areas. Little bit of like, you know, egg whites, soy milk, dairy, depending on, like I said, the type of vegetarian you are working with, can be really important. And then certain plant-based oils are going to be big there as well. And then sweets and things like that are somewhat avoided here. And then full on eggs, just because eggs happen to be high in cholesterol. But again, I think it's a little outdated. You know, nutrition is complicated. It's a little bit more complicated than just like eggs have cholesterol, eggs bad, you know. And there's a lot of different classifications of vegetarian diets. For those of you who are not aware, so you have like a semi-vegetarian, which is like, they call it, I guess they would call themselves like a flexitarian. That's the type of person who is, you know, occasionally, you know, they're probably avoiding like red meat, but they'll eat, you know, chicken or fish or whatever. But they're like, no red meat. Pesco-vegetarian or pescatarian. Actually, I'll go in this order. Ovo-vegetarian is a vegetarian who does consume eggs. So if you take like a vegan eats no animal products whatsoever, right? And then an ovo-vegetarian is a vegan who does still consume eggs. Lacto-vegan would be someone who does consume milk. A lacto-ovo vegan would be someone who consumes egg and milk. And then a pescatarian is someone who does consume fish. So it is, the name indicates what they do add to their diet beyond like, you know, standard veganism. So that's what we're going to see there, right? Vegans avoiding every animal product there is. So that's all the difference. So if we're doing this, we do need to make sure that we are getting that complementary protein, right? Animal products have all of your amino acids in them, and we need all amino acids. So, you know, we need to make sure that we are getting a full amino acid profile. We can do that by adding grains and legumes together, nuts and seeds together plus legumes, grains and nuts and seeds. You know, we're creating a combination of those things. Pair up your proteins. I always pull up this picture because I just love it so much, but you know, yeah, you can do any combination of this stuff. But the version that I really like that kind of shows you, you know, oh, that's still not actually it. Yeah, there we go. So you can see here, right, combining, you know, if you ate like rice plus more, like let's say you had like brown rice and you paired it with another like grain, like barley or something, that's not necessarily a complementary protein. And so like you would just end up elevating your levels of these amino acids, but you'd still be missing, you know, all the purple ones that are, we're going to see down here. But if you put like brown rice with like a legume, right, now you are sort of filling in each other's gaps, right? You are creating a complete amino acid profile. You know, we need purple plus teal instead of just a lot of teal, you know? So that's what's important there when it comes to complementing your proteins. And that's what we need to consider for our vegan clients, right? That, and then like, you know, I'd say like be cautious of certain, like, you know, lack of certain metals, phosphorus and calcium, probably two big ones actually, just because those are heavily present in like animal sourced foods. But if you're getting all of those nutrients in, do you need to eat meat? Not necessarily, you know. I think the world's going more vegan lately, you know, which is kind of cool. Now that veganism is becoming a little bit more approachable, thanks to like all these, you know, food substitutes that are out there and stuff. I got vegan chicken in my freezer right now. It's pretty good, you know. So summarizing everything up, diabetes, first one we talked about, metabolic disorder, right? This is going to screw up your glucose metabolism. If you have a pregnant athlete as well, they're going to have very specific nutrient recommendations, you know. They're growing a new human. That takes a lot of energy and a lot of materials, you know. Child athletes, biggest thing you need to be aware of the fact that friggin' they overheat like crazy. So make sure they always dress in layers and make sure they always have plenty of fluids there. That way they can strip those layers down as needed. And then they can also, like, you know, again, they just have tiny bodies, and tiny bodies have a harder time regulating temperature. The surface area to like world ratio is lower in kids. And so it's just way easier for them to lose heat too quickly and way easier for them to gain heat too quickly. Iron and calcium, really important for youths as well, and also for senior clients, right? Especially because like as we get older, we do have an increased risk of certain, you know, chronic illnesses and diseases and stuff. So it's really important to try to avoid those by getting adequate intake of certain nutrients. Vegetarian can be a healthy alternative to traditional diets. So if you are going to partake in like veganism or vegetarianism, you know, those can be really good sources of nutrients, but you know, there are some special considerations, especially when it comes to like protein intake and stuff. And I know that like you hear that all the time, and I get so annoyed when I'm around like someone who's a vegetarian, and I get so annoyed when someone else is like, how do you get your protein? It's like, there's plenty of protein in plant-based sources, but it is important to make sure that it is, you know, complementary. And that's that. It's kind of a quick one today, even though that was like 45, 50 slides. It moves quick, but do you guys have any questions? Loriana was a good one about the freaking phosphorus. I can't believe I missed that. I've been reading that wrong for years. Because my brain was like, oh, it's calcium phosphate, you need that, you know? But that actually does make sense. When I broke my hand, I lowered my sodium intake like crazy because I was trying to heal up as fast as possible. And I would go up and I would go just sit on the roof for like 30 minutes. I'm not a big fan of tanning, but when I had a broken hand, I was absolutely doing that. Trying to get that dang thing to heal as fast as possible.
Tomorrow.
Yeah. All right, guys. I'll see you tomorrow. We're meeting up in person tomorrow, 9 a.m. for the morning session. Thomas, you doing morning tomorrow, or you come in the evening?
In the morning.
Cool. Look forward to seeing you guys.
All right. I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Oh,
Thank you.
by the
Bye.
way, I actually just remembered. Mask mandates are back on, so we will be masked up tomorrow.
All righty.
So unfortunately, yeah, make sure you guys bring your mask. I'll put it in the email and stuff. But all right. See you later, guys.
All right,
Thanks.
cool.
Bye.
See ya.
Okay, bye guys.